That's a weird.
I know this because this happened last time with Brian. I remember when she said that the people had to drop off. I mean,
like this
that's
is,
what it was. Well, but I mean, go ahead and present it. Like I said, no business can be discussed until we get more.
Alexa, would you be willing to try to come back on in like 10 minutes to see if Doris is here?
Can Courtney maybe text me and tell me if Doris comes, and I'll come on as soon as I hear one way or the other?
That sounds much more efficient.
yeah.
Okay.
Alexis, can you put your
What's she saying?
What did you want?
You don't have her phone number?
Yeah, she wanted me to text her.
Right. Oh, and you don't have her number.
She might catch an email.
Yeah,
I'll
you
send
can
it.
email.
Do it right now.
What did she say?
Oh, she was just asking her to give her a text whenever, if Doris comes, so that she can join. Instead of just creeping in every 10 minutes.
Well, just added that to my notes.
Yeah.
But if Parker's like, we need to get this thing through that budget bill.
This is the thing that this is the reason why I'm fighting DARS to get my Roger on system. Because it sucks. When you're not able to hear people from a distance, it's like,
Well, of course. So you're not able to hear people right now because there is a listening device. I guess you already have it. Never mind.
last year, like many months ago, my AUD found out that my hearing got worse because of a potential, few months ago, all right, because of a potential COVID infection. And people,
Well, I guess we should start.
yeah, let's start.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll just get going, and yeah, this isn't an action item, but I encourage you to ask any questions you have or provide me any comments you have. My name's Melissa McMahon. I'm the Parking and Curb Space Manager for Arlington County, a funny little niche within our Transportation Division.
Very important niche.
It's cool. I'm relatively new to this position. I've been with the county, I've been a staff with the county since 2017, but I've only been in this position since the fall of 2021. What I'm bringing you tonight is an introduction to a new project that we're undertaking starting this year. It's a 3-year project, and it's called Performance Parking in Commercial Corridors. And so this presentation is going to go over as efficiently as I can the project purpose and goals, how this project is going to work, our overall schedule, our community process, and we'll have time for me to answer any questions that you have or for you to just tell me what you think about the idea. So performance parking, I just want to define that concept for a sec about how staff are looking at it. So we're talking about a data-driven project. So we're using technology to better understand existing parking utilization. Performance parking means actively managed. We are going to manage our parking supply to make parking more convenient and to reduce the negative impacts of hard-to-find parking. Performance parking is tailored. So we're talking about a system that allows us to customize to neighborhoods and blocks based on their actual use rather than hypothetical use. And it's flexible and responsive. Our goal is to ensure that the system allows us to respond to changing needs in the community. This project comes out of the Master Transportation Plan. So in our parking and curb space element, there is a policy specifically guiding us to utilize parking meter pricing strategies that vary by hour or location to better match parking availability and demand. So this pilot project is just one way to do that, and that's the approach that we're testing out through this project. And it is, I wanted to mention, it's funded by DAC. It's 100% funded, grant-funded project, and it is really what's allowing us the opportunity to test this technology innovation. So the purpose will be to improve the user experience with metered parking spaces on our curb. This is in our 2 main Metro Rail corridors. So the Roslyn-Ballston corridor and that Route 1 Richmond Highway corridor. We're looking to make spaces available more available more often. So when you need them and where you need them. The project will provide useful real-time information about price and about availability. So when folks are visiting a neighborhood, you'll be able to actually see where you can find parking and what it's going to cost. And the goal with this information and this better management is to reduce those negative impacts we see. And you all actually were talking about a few of them earlier tonight while we were chatting. Double parking, people parking where they shouldn't be, it's quite dangerous. Cruising, otherwise circling the block looking for parking, and a kind of extra trips and distraction the drivers have with that. So, and even simple things like deciding not to come to a neighborhood because it's too hard to find parking. They're going to go somewhere else for dinner or for business. So those are all negative impacts we'd like to reduce. And this is a pilot project, so it does have an evaluation component. VDOT is actually going to conduct a third-party evaluation of this project, and we like that because of its third-party nature. The contractor that's helping us on the team do it is not the one evaluating it, so there's some good separation of that. This project does not seek to increase overall parking revenue. It's not one of the project goals. We have no idea what the impact will be on revenue. Because it does use pricing to influence behavior, we know and expect that there will be places where metered parking will become more expensive and places where it will become less expensive. We just don't know how those will balance out relatively within the grand scheme of revenue. This project also does not increase all meter rates across the board. So like I said, some places will get cheaper, whilst other places get more expensive. This project does not aim to decrease the number of reserved ADA accessible parking spaces that we have in the network. We are including those spaces in the inventory, and it will be part of this sort of pilot process. So if we see, just like with every other type of parking asset, that there is a lot of occupancy of accessible spaces in a particular neighborhood, that gives us information on how to better manage it. And it could be better managed by pricing changes, and it could be better managed by supply. So those are things that we'll learn more about through better data. This project also does not create parking hot lanes. This is not dynamic pricing in that sense of driving on a toll road and not knowing what it's going to be from minute to minute or hour to hour. We won't change metered pricing any more often than about once a quarter in this pilot, because we need to change the price structure, see how it's impacting the community, how it's being used, and understanding if our changes are having the effects that we're looking for, and then change again throughout that pilot period. So it's not going to be super fast, and it will be communicated in a few different ways. There will be feeds of available data, public facing, but we'll also be communicating out to the community across the entire pilot program period, which is 3 years. Can it work? Yes, in San Francisco, a very similar project was undertaken. This is several years ago now. They used in-ground sensors. They were able to determine the occupancy of those spaces live, and they followed a similar type of process of tailoring pricing in different areas over the course of 2 years and communicating those pricing changes out to the community. And the results were that the average parking rates people were paying actually went down, parking availability improved, it was easier to find parking, and it was easier to pay and avoid parking citations, as well as these, I'll call them secondary impacts. When you have less circling for parking, you're producing fewer vehicle miles and greenhouse gas emissions.
Forgive me if I'm jumping ahead, but how is that possible? How is it possible that parking became more available and rates decreased because you're not increasing parking? So I was just wondering, I don't understand how it happened.
Right, so I think it depends a lot on the community, but basically we know we have assets today that are underutilized. So the parking space is there and it's not full all the time. And then we have the parking spaces that are more utilized and potentially overutilized. And those are the blocks where people are double parking and it's really hard to find space. So through a program like this, better information on availability and pricing that kind of helps push behavior a little bit, you get more use of those spaces that are off the key core, and you you make it so that the space on those really congested blocks actually have more availability. In a program like this, you're really targeting that like one space is always available on a block, sort of a rule of thumb. Yeah, so you're better using the whole asset instead of concentrating it in one little place.
And I think you already said this, but so with dynamic pricing, do certain spots go down if you I mean, because that could be another way to go opened up. So right now you have all the parking meters, the same prices.
Yep.
Right? So as well as some going up, do some go down?
Yes, yes. So that's what we anticipate. You can kind of visualize it where on that, if you have a block that's always busy, those prices will go up. But around the corner, 2 blocks away, there's always availability. Those prices will go down. And the customer, you all, or people who are driving and visiting Arlington will see an availability information screen that shows this block is full, this block is empty, this block is much more expensive than this block, and they'll be able to like actually change their behavior based on both pricing and availability
So like
information.
an app they pull up?
Yeah, right now, as a part of the project, it's a web page that'll be mobile friendly. And we don't anticipate necessarily always providing that, except for the purposes of a pilot we need to kickstart. The project will produce an API so that the feed of data that our project has can be used by any app developer who's providing this kind of stuff. So Google could take it, Waze could take it, they could show it on their interfaces too if they wanted. It's just that since it doesn't exist yet, we need to kind of kickstart and provide people something to look at. So I'll talk a little bit more about how it's going to work. This is Arlington, and we've got highlighted there the 2 corridors where these parking spaces are. We're talking about approximately 4,500 metered parking spaces will be in this pilot, and we have to roll out the occupancy detection system across all of those areas in order to be able to see what's going on in each of those parking spaces.
One question, the area in South Arlington, is there a particular reason that's not included?
Columbia Pike, is that what you're
The
specifically?
bottom right, in the Richmond Highway corridor towards the bottom, there's like a little gap.
It's probably just that there isn't, sorry, the resolution on my.
Yeah.
That's like why it's not yellow or?
Yeah, so it's in the highlighted.
So it's probably, no, that's a good question, because I know Potomac Avenue, and there are metered parking spaces there. So I would just say it's a flaw in this illustration.
Oh, okay.
That's gonna be my guess, because we are including metered parking space all the way down to that 4-mile run border. So
Yeah.
I can't exactly say why they're not showing the metered parking that goes up around that corner.
Yeah.
And
Isn't that near
nothing
the
is set in
Amazon
stone
campus?
yet. Don't have-
Almost.
Oh, okay.
Like, this is something that we're working towards having set up for a span of 3 years, correct?
Yes, and I'll get into, right after the technology overview, I'll talk about schedule and I'll tell you where we are in the project. So the technology that we're working with in this pilot is a combination of in-ground sensors, wireless gateways that take the sensor messages of car here, car not here, and send it to the cloud. The staff have a dashboard view for management of the assets, and the public has that web app interface view. And that view is going to be simpler, but it will be able to show that the availability information, high, medium, low kind of thing, the prices, and we actually have the ability to layer on other things about Arlington County, like transit information and that sort of thing. But we haven't fully designed it, but we're going to be rolling out more information about what folks can see. The project, technology-wise, does not capture or store any kind of private data. Cameras are not being used as a part of the pilot project, and these sensors are really just able to tell vehicle there, vehicle not there.
Doris is here.
Okay.
Yay! And I can pause for a second.
Okay, I have a question then.
Yeah.
Hi, Doris. Elizabeth, we're all here. We're waiting for you.
Hi, Doris.
But we just started about 5 minutes ago. We really did wait. this is an exciting presentation that you'll be interested in. It's about parking spaces. A new parking program.
You want to scoot their chair further down?
I don't worry, put it on the floor.
Or do you want to
Case I
put it
can
on the
also-
seat back here?
Trying something new out on my phone.
I think the chair is.
Oh, actually, it turns out I can reach them.
Oh, cool.
Voice command
To record and then like narrate it to you.
So using Google Docs and there.
So were you able to hear anything I said when you were walking in? Yeah, I was talking about how we're about 5 minutes in, 10 minutes into a presentation on this new pilot program in Arlington where they have in the Ballston corridor and in the Route 1 corridor, they're looking at metered parking and doing dynamic pricing. It's going to be for 3 years. You're shaking your head like you've already heard of this. So she's talking about how it will work. Say that again. That's to bring you up to speed.
That does.
Okay. And I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Since it sounds like this, we've already gone to the technology overview.
Mhm.
I was waiting, but how do you deal with the racial justice issues of this?
So that's a good question, and
I mean, not racial, like economic justice issues. I didn't mean racial.
yeah, well, in equity and inclusion, principles are a part of how we're designing our community engagement, and we're really, in part, it's sort of why we're here with you among many audiences to make sure that that our project is factoring in how this could impact people. Now, there are different opinions on what might happen with a program like this that makes that changes prices, right, for parking on street. So there could be the argument that if you're increasing pricing, it's going to disadvantage folks who don't have as much money to spend. But because we are also expecting to reduce pricing nearby, we're actually creating a greater spectrum of opportunity by price. So if the question is economic opportunity and economic fairness, one of the things we're doing is making sure we reach out to our retail businesses that are often they're right in front of all of this metered parking, and many retail employees park in metered spaces as their normal workday approach. And we want them to know this isn't intended to push them out or to make it more expensive, but instead there's probably parking not right in front of their business, but a block away that's going to get cheaper, and that's going to be better for them. So the goal is to have it result in a better outcome for everybody, and that'll be a combination of the availability and price that will make that work. But we also don't know what will happen on a microcosmic level, like on a block-by-block neighborhood basis. So if we see that a pricing proposal creates unexpected effects for businesses, employees, residents, we'll be hearing about that, and we'll be able to take it into account. It's one of the reasons why the project that pricing change period of the project will start in early 2024. So it's not going to happen to your earlier questions about schedule. It won't happen right away. We're still in the setup phase, but once those start, we'll still be doing that for 2 years. So for 2 years, not changing them more than once a quarter, we'll be making changes and reflecting with the community on how it's working, hopefully to get something that works really well by the end.
So you'll probably be asking about economic justice issues in your assessments.
Yes, in our outreach, in being an engagement process, both designed to reach a lot of different types of people, and an engagement process that's also designed to ask questions and encourage feedback on these various aspects of how people experience parking at the curb. Yep. A little more detail about our technology. I wanted to offer some pictures and a sense here. The stall occupancy sensor is an embedded in-ground sensor in the pavement. We will be delineating parking spaces, so there's one sensor per space, and it's completely wireless. It's completely underneath the surface of the asphalt, and it's sealed off with epoxy. It's battery operated and very low power. So the goal, once these go in, is that they can have up to a 10-year lifespan if they're undisturbed without having to be replaced. We obviously do a lot of construction in the right-of-way here, so there might be instances where they are disturbed and they're dug up unexpectedly. But in that event, we can replace them, and that's fine. We'll know when they go offline, and we'll be able to fix that.
I just want to cut in, Alexa just joined virtually.
Alexa,
Welcome back.
Hello, everyone.
we're going over this new parking project in Arlington.
The next piece of technology in the project that I wanted to just highlight are the wireless gateways. These will be installed mostly on our traffic signal poles. It's a small box, just like the sensor in the ground is quite small. So we're talking about the size of a notebook, really, and it will be attached to the traffic signal pole, and it will cover a range of those sensors in the ground, receive their information, and send it up to the cloud. These are also low power and will last a very long time.
So did you say earlier this information will not be stored? Because some people will probably want to, well, will they report it to police so they know where I was on such and such a date?
Right. Well, this project does not use camera technology at all. So there's no information about who is parking where, information about your car or anything like that. It's just car there, car not there.
Okay.
Yep. So there's no personal or private data collected.
That's right, you said that.
Yeah, and we know there are people who are audiences who are concerned with that, and it was actually a factor in our selection of a design approach that we thought would make sense for the community.
And these aren't weight sensors, right? It's just a.
Correct.
Yeah.
The in-ground sensor is a combination. I think there's a radar element, sort of a near area radar element, and something that senses a change in an electromagnetic field. So it knows there's like this metal thing above it. And
Okay.
it says it's there, and then the metal thing goes away and it's not there.
Okay. Yeah, I was worrying about those Amazon trucks that.
So right, it can't distinguish type of parker. So we won't know that, but we will know duration of stay, which is I don't know, technical jargon for how long someone parks.
Yeah.
And so in a metered parking space, if there's a lot of high turnover there, people are only parking for 5 minutes to run in and grab something and go, we'll actually know that from the sensors. And so we'll be able to tell, this metered parking space, and I think you actually mentioned this earlier tonight, like sometimes maybe the problem is that there needs to be better opportunities to drop off and pick someone up, to be at the curb for a short time to increase accessibility. And we'll know more about where opportunities for that lie by seeing this detailed data about how long cars stay.
Yes, I was trying to channel Doris, because I remember, Doris, you had mentioned at some point that the bike lanes, I think you said, sometimes block when you need to get out in front of a business. So, but I'm glad you found it valuable. It might not have been what Doris meant.
Oh, you mean, drop up and drop off?
Yes,
Yeah,
dropping off.
Well, okay, there are any number of issues with that right now, with parking. And I see some things that I had not thought of before, because we relocated to offices in Crystal City rather than being here. And, but the first thing I wanted to ask about this is, if it's a new system for the meters, right? Okay. How is it going to detect a person, whether a person belongs at an accessible space or not? Because I know that there's no, free accessible parking anymore in public spaces with meters, right?
Right.
metered spaces, which has been the case for some time. But how is it going to distinguish or not whether are you going to continue to have designated accessible spaces to ensure, this is what you need, to ensure that people with disabilities are able to, park in various designated places that were in the inventory that we had of accessible parking spaces that were fitted for persons with vehicles that needed larger spaces and were able to have a clearer path getting out of their vehicles. And they used to have the what would they call them, carpulator or whatever. Since I don't drive, I'm not. Yeah, familiar with the changes. So how is the system going to recognize? And it also gave longer time, I think, even though you're okay. So how is the system going to distinguish those people any longer?
So a couple layers there. The accessible spaces that we have in our inventory today will all still be there, and they will be part of the program in the sense that we'll put a sensor in those spaces, and we'll be able to learn about how they're used. And we will be able to distinguish because we can manage the assets by type. So we will have essentially a layer that is the accessible spaces, and we can see them and we know they're accessible spaces. So we're not changing that. We're not taking away inventory. We're not changing the signage. We're not changing the rules of parking there. What we won't be able to know is if a person who has chosen to park in an accessible space has a placard or not, if they're allowed to be parking there. We'll just know how much it's used. We'll know if it's really full all the time.
You'll know if they have a plate, but you won't know if they have a placard.
We won't know if they have a
they
plate
don't.
either because this technology is not camera technology. It's just car there, car not there.
Okay, that's what I thought I heard you say. That's why I answered.
Yeah, so that is a piece of information we won't get out of the system. However, if we see that there are accessible spaces that are very highly utilized, we could do some sort of ad hoc visual field work to see if they're really highly utilized and they're constantly being used by folks who are properly plated and placarded, or if it's what you described, which is that sometimes you guys can go through, you look for a space and you can't find one because it's full of people who are parking there inappropriately.
Is there any meter now?
Only in San Francisco. She said they piloted it in San Francisco.
Is what?
So we do not have the infrastructure in the ground yet. So we are just at the beginning of our project, and a system like this has been used in the city of San Francisco, and there are a few other cities in the U.S. who have used it. And
so it's going to charge you. This is what I thought I heard that you were asking, and so what I don't understand about that is how it's going to provide. One of the things that the accessible spaces were supposed to provide. Now you're saying there's nothing physically there, so we don't have to worry about the accessibility of the meter device, right? But it was giving you twice the time.
Yep.
So
And
how
is
it going to know to give you price?
well, the meters, your interaction as a customer with the meter doesn't change. This system, so you will still use the meter as you normally would at an accessible space, and all of those parking rules for enforcement purposes still apply. So you can still park for twice the time at regular meters because that's also part of how the policy works.
But your system, but you said that it can't read that you have a plate or a placard. So how can it distinguish that you're a driver with a disability?
The system that we're piloting is not an enforcement system. It is an occupancy data system. So what we're going to do is we're going to collect data about how spaces are used, how frequently, how busy they are, and we are going to create a set of pricing proposals, which are staff. It'll be driven by models and advice from data and consultants, but it will be a staff level decision on how to improve pricing structure to get better utilization across all of the assets. But it's not going to, as a parker, you would still go to the meter, and the meter will still tell you exactly how much you have to pay, and all of the rules as an accessible parker would still apply.
You'll
The
go to the
duration is
meter,
set.
there are meters there.
Yep, there are meters there now, and they will stay there. We're not moving any meters. We're not changing the rules for a parker at a meter.
Are they going to be lowered
Are
and
the,
made accessible?
Well, yeah, so
for
nothing,
every space.
yeah. So for the way I interpret it is that this system is to determine utilization of the county's parking spaces to determine if
Sorry,
policies.
there's noise in this system. If I'm making faces, that's why.
You're good. It's to, ensure that parking spaces are being used efficiently and not being, don't want to say abused, but for lack of a better word, abused. But like, the specific meter designed for ADA spaces will still exist and you can still interact it. This is more of them tracking the data to say, we have, let's say, for example, we have 20 ADA spaces and,
That'd be nice.
and like the Boston-Roslyn corridor, like we have 20 spaces throughout that corridor, but we identified that in Clarendon, the use data is double that. So staff would be able to say, oh, we may need to add more spaces, and whether that's like a dynamic space where we take a regular space and the plate says 88 parking between, X hour and Y hours. That's not, not speaking on behalf of the staff, but like, that's something I can see this project assist us with.
So for right now, what I want to say is, Elizabeth, what I'm hearing is that you're changing the whole concept of, it used to be that people with disabled driver placards or license plates or placards, if they pulled up to a meter, it would be free for as long as you were there. But then Frank Leary changed things and we got all may park almost pay, right? And but the meters and the parkolators were provided extra time for people with disabilities to get back and forth in exchange, because that was part of the free meter system previously, to give you time to go in and come out, whether you were a wheelchair user or used crutches or whatever it was. And now it seems like that whole concept, if you implement this new thing, or if you already have, we'll take that agreement.
I don't think so, Doris.
No.
I think what it really is, which still would have an impact. As I understand it, they're trying to create a dynamic pricing system so that, I don't know if this is on or not, but so that the heavily used spots, they will be monitoring them, and about every once a week or whatever, they will say, gosh, these spots are really heavily used. Let's increase the price of the meter. And that will encourage people to go farther away from their destination. The further away they are, the less expensive the meter. Well, not the further away. So they will increase the prices on high-used meters and decrease the prices on low-used meters, in the hope that people will go to low-used meters. Apparently in San Francisco, they did a study and it worked. But maybe one of your concerns is, that I was going to ask is, since disability parking spaces are always in the high-used areas, then would you be doing the dynamic pricing on those, or those would just automatically stay the same?
No, that's a great question. And right now, we want to leave everything on the table. And so we recognize that the users of the accessible spaces have mobility challenges. That's why they exist, right? So we're not expecting that the resulting recommendations of pricing changes are going to be intended to push people out of that space that's right in front of where they need to go to some space 3 blocks away, because that's not how the spaces work. However, we might learn, one, from the data that we're getting in those spaces about if we need more of them. We need more of those in that particular area. And we might find out that there are people, like, that there are, I don't know how to describe it, that there's still price sensitivity that ADA space users are willing to accept that allows them to have more potential access to their spaces. So again, this is where.
I don't know, that seems like a disability discrimination issue. Because by virtue of, because you can see how slow I walked in here.
Right.
By virtue of my disability,
Right.
I have to take the closer in
Yep.
spot, which
Yep.
will automatically probably be the more expensive spot.
Yep.
So it is discrimination to charge more for those spots.
Right. I hear you, and we're sensitive to this. So I guess what I wanna get right out there and say is that, let's say that space is on a really high use block and the other spaces go up like double in price from 175 to whatever 2 times that is.
Right.
That does not mean that that's the recommendation that will be applied to the ADA space.
Right.
But right now, because
Has
we
the
kind of
access
don't.
board reviewed this and come out with some guidance on it?
Well, we haven't done anything yet. So
Yeah.
so no one has reviewed. That's why I'm here. We are at phase 0 of the project, and we haven't even installed the technology to collect the occupancy data yet. That's going to start this summer. This is going to be April through July, August. And then we're going to collect preliminary data, which is all the before data before any pricing changes happen. And that'll be all through the fall and into the winter. And then next year, that's when we will implement the first of pricing changes. And I have a hunch that one of the things, because you saw, we're talking about 4,500 spaces in the network, changes to ADA space prices aren't going to be the first thing we try to do. So I'm just throwing that out there, like, it's not likely to be the first the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. So we'll still just be collecting data to understand. And you also mentioned that concern that the wrong people are parking in the spaces. That will be interesting to see how that plays out, to see if we see spaces that are accessible, that are relative to a commercial corridor, some that are really well used and some that are not really well used. So we'll be able to start to see if there's patterns in those data that tell us a story about how they're being used and if they're being abused. And that's why I was saying there might be supplemental field work that happens with ADA spaces before we propose pricing changes on them.
Right, so this is more of a research study to better understand what's going on in these parking spaces, to better figure, or to better understand.
It's like smart parking.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's basically to research and study this type of stuff to make parking much easier in Arlington.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue to the slide I have up there right now on the screen, and I'll just talk through it, is just a description of our approach. So it's a 3-year project. This first year, from roughly now, January, February, all the way through December, is the year in which we install the equipment, the technology in the field, that just occupancy detection equipment, the year in which we set up the public-facing dashboard / apps where people can view occupancy data and can view pricing information, the year in which we gather that existing conditions data. How is the system operating today?
So Arlington is getting a research grant?
Yes, so this is 100% funded by VDOT. It's an Innovation and Technology Transportation Fund.
And it's, where's it coming from?
The Virginia Department of Transportation.
The what?
The Virginia Department of Transportation, the state. Yeah, and it's
Wow.
100% funded, which
Yeah.
is nice, because there's not even a match that we have to put forward for this. And so this first year is no pricing changes, and then the 2 subsequent years are when we start incrementally making changes and observing their effectiveness. And at the end, we have a
Is this
recommendation.
study coming through TPP?
No, it's not a TPB, based activity.
One thing I would say about increasing the prices, or I know it's not on the table right now, but at the same time, I come from a moderately, a minimum income household. I'm about to get a wheelchair accessible vehicle. One of the major things that I'm always concerned about is, am I paying more? And I think realistically, I actually like what you guys are actually planning on doing. I think it will be a massive benefit to Arlington. But at the same time, I think if we see a increase on parking spaces, then I think we should be looking into them instead of looking at increasing the prices. I think looking into them and seeing what's going on before jumping to increasing the price.
Yep.
And if I can make a comment to that, given that pricing will be in phase 2 and staff will have, about 6 months, or is it a year data?
It won't be a full year of data. It'll probably, and we'll start getting data as every sensor goes in. So if that makes sense, like they're going in April and we'll start having this trickle of data start to appear. But let's say August, September, October, November, December, we'll have about 5 months of data before we ask the board for permission through an ordinance to change prices for a subsequent couple of years.
Okay. With that, I think, us as a commission, I'm sure it's up to the board's discretion, but we would like to be involved in the conversation around the adjustments to that ordinance, particularly in the ADA section.
Right. Because
But to say, we can have that discussion forever, but I think we really can't make an informed opinion until we have the data in front of us.
And that makes a lot of sense. And everything in this year is building up to the board having a clear rationale from us through the board report about why we're asking for the ordinance to give us this flexibility over this period of time. And it is a finite period of time. So we don't expect the board to give us a blank check for changing prices for forever. It'll probably be a 2-year window with a date certain where it ends, where we have to come back anyway to ask for what happens next. Otherwise, it might probably roll right back to where we started again.
Well, you did say that you were coming here because you'd like to get our comments. So I'd like to submit a specific comment.
Yes, please.
And that is that the pricing for disability spots would not, would be the last spots to be considered for pricing increases. If I understood you correctly, you have that. And that there would be a cap on prices at a certain level.
Yep. And I appreciate that you specified increases because it might be that what we see with the data is we can decrease.
Yeah, we want those.
Can I ask one further question, which is kind of related to what you had first asked about, whether I had a question on which drop-off spaces?
Sure, because she's the parking person. She's the one that has to.
So the drop-offs, the issue is right now between bike lanes and metered parking spaces, often there is no place left for a taxi or a paratransit vehicle to leave people off on, at the curb.
Right.
And it used to be just outside here. It used to be that there was drop-off space in front of the FedEx, in front of 2300, in front of, Courthouse Social, in front of the entrances of buildings. Okay, they added parking spaces and then they added the bike lanes. And now in Crystal City, I see things like they're adding planters that are, ground planters. And I know this comes from the site plan review because they talk about it all the time. In part, at least, it comes from there. And transportation folks are there at these meetings, so they're also talking about parking and circulation and all of that. So the question is, if the county is putting in a lot of new parking spaces and there are bike lanes there and there's this and that and the other, there's no place to pull up. In fact, in front of my building, you can't pull up because they've got signs that say you can't stand there. Although some trucks do. But so if I arrive in a taxi or a paratransit vehicle, they're going to stop to unload me at a place that has one of these damn planters in it. And this is what's true in front of my building. And there's not enough space, it looks to me, for very good maneuverability for wheelchair users. And when they let you off, this planter is such that there's a step. So when you come right off of the vehicle, all you see is a stair, and you have to know how to planter. And the two things have to be put together: the design of the sidewalk and the environmental thing, and the fact that we're going to have all kinds of meter parking, and this is going to be, whether it's a taxi cab or a Star vehicle or a Metro Access vehicle or whatever it is, there's not going to be places to put down this and to safely alight.
So I really appreciate those comments. I have a couple thoughts on them, one pertaining to the project and then also kind of outside the project. One is that outside the project, what I've seen in our parking meter data is that we're actually slowly losing metered parking spaces out of total county inventory. And that is not a comment on your personal experience. It's just it's because actually of a lot of those other things that you're talking about, the desire for pickup drop-off areas, which don't count, we remove meters for those, bicycle facilities, other kinds of things just end up with attrition. So we have a slowly shrinking meter inventory. But to this project's purposes, if we see activity at a space that is a 2-hour metered parking space in a commercial corridor that has a lot of pickup drop-off demand, we will see that in the data. And we'll be able to say, these spaces probably shouldn't be 2-hour metered parking. They should probably be 15-minute pickup drop-off. And with those kinds of recommendations, it's not a pricing recommendation now. It's just a knowledge growth that we will have, because never before have we been able to know what's actually happening in our parking spaces without sending someone out there to watch. That's what we do now. When people say, we have a problem, we have to send staff out, and then they stand there and watch what's happening for a period of time. And it's not terribly efficient, but now we're going to know in much greater detail. And we can actually make recommendations that will increase the availability of pickup drop-off space. And I actually quite anticipate that that's going to be a major outcome of this.
Do you have one question? The software, of course, is focusing on parking.
Yep.
Is the county considering expanding this to non-parking zones or restricted zones, such as like bus stops, and especially when you're coming around the corner, people tend to take up that space where it says "do not stop" to the curb.
Let's put a sensor there and see just how much of that's actually listened to.
Yeah.
So the short answer is this pilot project doesn't include those spaces.
Okay.
However, what we want to learn from executing on it is that these data help us manage the space better, and then we can start applying it to other places. So we can start using them in loading zones. We have a staff interest, which is borne out by community comment, that our loading zones are not always used properly. And it can be bad because the people who do need to load, like commercial loading activity, ends up double parking against something else because there's someone else using a commercial loading zone inappropriately. So there are a lot of, staff acknowledges there are a lot of different uses on the curb, and we are only capturing one, albeit a major one, in the pilot. And then a later phase, if the pilot is successful, would be, hey, these work pretty well. We're going to now install them in this other use type and see what we can learn with that use type, because it is flexible. If we had enough, if we had all the money in the world and all the time in the world, we could have in every space on the curve, and we could differentiate between all of them.
Okay, well, we'll see how this pilot goes then.
How will people in jurisdictions know about this? There was a lot they park almost a was instituted. There was a lot of competition. And from their commission on this.
So there are a couple answers.
The last one.
Yeah, a couple answers to that question. In the design of our outreach and engagement for this pilot, we include various types of stakeholder engagement that go beyond Arlington residents. For instance, we have a heavy emphasis on business engagement. And so that's not just the business owners, but their employees will be touching and reaching, because we want them to know what we're doing with the spaces they're probably using from day to day. We're also planning pop-ups and decals that are going to go on the multimeters announcing the project. So people who regularly park in Arlington and see these decals are going to see there's a project that might be impacting their, hopefully improving the availability of space for them, but might be changing some of the situation they see. We also, the outcome of the project when it comes to what a parker experiences is really two pieces. They're going to have access to, through our promotion, availability information. So anyone who parks here can see the webpage, can see what's available in Arlington. And if you're a frequent visitor and parking and using the meters, they'll be able to get familiar with that. And to even use it for trip planning. Because if you're heading from Alexandria into Arlington for the evening to visit with friends, and you're all going to the same neighborhood, you can pull that up in advance and see how full the neighborhood is getting and be like, I'm gonna go to this other block. We should, and I say that, say should with fingers crossed, be able to have elements of this that would allow for the kind of prediction of what it's gonna be. You know, if your dinner is at 7 and it's 4, you know it's not as busy now as it's gonna be at 7, but because the occupancy data we have is 24 hours, 7 days a week, there's historical data there, akin to how Google can tell you it's gonna be busy at that time that you're going. So we'll be able to have some features like that, ideally, in our final outcome of what the public can see. And also, the parkers will always experience paying for parking through the same ways they currently do. So Park Mobile will push the correct parking price, and they'll know. So they'll know before they purchase what they're paying for how long it's good, that kind of thing. They'll also know, because the meters, if you use a meter just by walking up, by approaching it and not through your phone, it will be pushing the correct parking price. So there might be Alexandrians or others from out of town who do come surprised to see something that isn't 175 anymore, and it's actually 225, whatever the upcharge is, or lower, like, oh, this is only 125 now. I swear it was 175 before. But they'll see it and they'll know it because it's providing them the accurate price on the moment that they're trying to park.
I just have one other question. When I was asking about the economic justice issues, I liked your response, and then all of a sudden I thought, problem. So
I want to hear it.
So and maybe it's not, but I'm familiar with Ballston, maybe not as recently, so you can tell me I'm wrong. And it seems like there's only meters in the high congestion areas. And then otherwise you have to park in the neighborhoods where there are no meters. So the concept that if a meter is really expensive along Wilson, you could just go a few blocks away, is basically saying, sorry, you can't have any of the metered parking if you can't pay the price, you have to go into the neighborhood. So it's always been that way, but that's where I think the economic justice issues come in, because every metered spot along Wilson is going to be expensive. So I liked your theory that you would go to meters further out that were less expensive, but it does, further out is basically the neighborhood without meters.
Well, I think that that's, it's a helpful observation, and I've noted it because I think we don't know what we're gonna see yet in terms of that variability of occupancy across meters. So one thing that we will acknowledge, and it actually did show up, it's sort of too in the weeds to put on a slide, but in the San Francisco data, is that there are spaces that are more and less price sensitive. So in other words, like if what you were describing were to play out, and we saw occupancy data in Ballston that showed uniform high occupancy across every space in the neighborhood, right? We might not be able to use pricing very effectively to change behavior because we wouldn't have anywhere to push people. But what we expect to see is that we're going to have the equivalent of 110% occupancy on like the most common through path where cars come. So Wilson, Clarendon kind of thing, or Fairfax maybe. And then on side streets where there are parking meters, not quite into the neighborhood, we will see a quick drop off, and there will be variability. So there will be a range in which there is a peak and there are lower areas. They might still be kind of busy, but it might not be as busy. So we might be able to tweak the price a little bit. And again, it might not be a lot, but we might be able to shift with the goal of reducing again the circling or the double parking in those areas. So it remains to be seen, in part because we just don't know how much variability there is.
And I guess one thing that could happen is maybe you put more metered spots in so that people have the option of going to lower parking spots.
Yeah, I mean, because this project is focused on the existing meter inventory, we'll only have occupancy data for where meters are today. But it will be interesting to see what problems we hit upon. If there are areas where there is just no give, and there is potentially unmanaged street. So because there's RPP, right? And we're not touching residential permit parking zones, and we don't tend to put meters in residential areas. So even if there's an unmanaged residential street near Ballston, we're not going to go meter it so that people can park there
that's
and
what
pay.
I was trying to get at was, okay, and again, it sounds like I'm behind the times because I'm one of those people who does not go to Ballston or Clarendon anymore.
Right.
Because I can't park.
Right.
But luckily I have a scooter and so I can go to Ballston.
Yeah.
But no lift equipment. So my thought was, when I used to go to Clarendon and couldn't find a spot, all of the neighborhood ones had zoning.
Right, so you can't park there.
Again, it's not an option anymore. When you increase the whole idea of how would that be so wonderful, just go a little further out. But a little further out tends to be the zoning spaces. So just wanted to mention that.
And I think it's a valid hypothesis that we'll be testing. Because what we're going to see is if there's variability, because where there's variability in use within the parking meter inventory, that's where we can have an influence with price. But if there's no variability in use, we're going to have less of ability to have the influence we want to have by changing prices. There make no sense to just raise the prices in all of Ballston if there's nowhere for someone to go to an alternative. That wouldn't be within the principles of the project.
Although it'd be kind of cool to find out whether usage of share bikes and increased when the prices went up.
Right. That's true. We could grab those data, but it'd probably be like a not causal. It'd be correlation, but not causation necessarily. Yeah.
So yeah, I did want to express my concerns, particularly because I know some zoning areas, like where I used to live, it would be 8 to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. And parking tends to be busier on the weekends. So I fear that those within single-family areas might get negative impacts from this, which, and I don't want that negative impact to, harpoon this initiative, because I do believe it's an initiative, considering the amount of parking garages we have, that could be another parking resource used. So that's my one concern that I think staff should be cognizant of, because I think this will be a great tool for the county, but I just don't want us to have to take it away due to this one potentially negative.
Yeah, no, and that's helpful. And so the way the residential permit parking program works today, people can have either daytime restrictions or nighttime restrictions or both.
Yeah.
And in some parts of the county, and I want to guess that like near Clarendon is one of those, there's like enough all day long demand that they kind of put them all together. I know there's a block or two around Washington Liberty High School, that because that school is busy during the day and at night with events, they needed both. So the restrictions basically run almost all the time. So in the event that we were to cause a negative externality like that, we could both see it and we'd have tools to assist with it. Because if that RPP area of the zone only had daytime restrictions and needed nighttime ones too, because there was more incentive for people to go searching for parking, we could fix that. But I appreciate the point, because we could also talk about whether we need or want any sort of enabling conversation for staff to be able to initiate those conversations with neighborhoods and not have them necessarily go through the same petition process. So it's something that we can think about.
And does the RPP allow you to be that dynamic?
Well, RPP wouldn't be dynamic, but it would be.
So dynamic in response to, like, if it's a neighborhood in Clarendon, it's not something that has to take, like, we have to go through like a 3-month process. Staff can be like, let's talk to, Lime Village Civic Association and see if they want us to change the RPP.
It's so to protect the best interests of the actual residents, it's not super dynamic, staff driven. Right now, it's decided on a block by block basis. So a block of residents can say, we have a problem parking, and we have a very specific set of steps they have to go through to qualify.
Got it.
And if these pricing changes were causing additional occupancy on their street block during those unregulated times that caused them to pass a threshold of qualifying, they could petition and get that change. But it wouldn't be, I would say it wouldn't likely even be in the interest of the RPP residents to want us to just do it on their behalf. It would be a conversation. But I appreciate that point. We can prepare in advance by looking at how many of these edge zones don't have nighttime restrictions that might be impacted by this, and how many do, and where those areas are.
Okay. And then I did have another question. So how does, I'm not sure if this was in the original thought process on this, but is staff considering how to use this tool and other parking assets that are owned by private companies? Like, the Boston parking garage is a very large parking garage, and it's cheap. It's like, I think, $1 an hour.
It's very cheap,
Yeah. Will the dashboard also be incorporating those price areas to sort of encourage, like, hey, I know you have to, like, it's a bit of a hassle to get in the parking garage, but
so that's a great question. This project does include up to 10 dynamic messaging display signs that can be installed in the community, depicting the availability out of our system, but also potentially, if it were available, feeds of availability from off-street parking. And so I say if it were available because by and large, most garages these days don't have a data feed like that, even if they wanted to share it with us. But we could in theory be depicting that to say, there's, it's 80% occupied on these block faces, but there's a garage that is only 40% occupied next door. But to your point, in lieu of actual dynamic data about the garages, we might be able to weave just basic wayfinding information together. So it's saying where metered on-street space is, but it might also say there are 2 garages with a total of 500 parking spaces this way and 1 garage this way. And so we haven't really had time yet because, again, we're so early in the process to sort of flesh out what those look like and where they would go. But we do plan on having a whole piece of our engagement process focus on those questions so that our stakeholders can kind of hone in on what would be the most useful to my way that I experience these neighborhoods. What stretches of road should they be on? And I think having some of that on the ground feedback from folks is going to be helpful in us sort of laying out where those could go and how they could be most helpful.
I just wanted to ask the original, whatever it was in 2000, parking policy for Arlington, that was the all-day park, was collecting data on violations of accessible parking at meters, and supposedly that data was going towards, purchase of new meters and the reading devices, the parcolators, and all of that. Is this study going to look at how these kinds of devices may affect potential revenue from the current way we're doing it, because there's not as much of a, or there doesn't seem to be, maybe it's just me, I don't see where it would collect that same data and maybe be able to let the county and even this commission know about what kind of revenue is coming from violations of metered accessible parking in Arlington, where it's going.
So this study doesn't specifically have a piece where we are incorporating revenue based on issuance of tickets for violations of accessible spaces. However, there is a nexus really between that occupancy data I was talking about. Like if we see this accessible space is occupied all the time, and we see from our transaction data that only 50% of the time are people paying for it, we can actually coordinate on enforcement effort that is designed to understand and sort of troubleshoot if people aren't actually paying to park where they mean to park. And that could benefit an accessible space or a regular space. So we do anticipate that we're going to see some of that. But it would be a sort of different, I apologize, I don't know anything about the history of spending violation revenues on like feeding it back into improving the accessibility of parking spaces, for instance. I'm happy to look into that and see what I can learn. And the police are a partner in this. They're aware of this project. They're not a key mover and shaker of it, because really we're going to be creating the framework that they ultimately will be enforcing against. If you're paying for parking or not, that's kind of what they do. But I can find out if I can learn more about that piece of it.
I mean, because there was actually one of the good things that was compromised that came in large part through this commission and commission members and chairs, is that Arlington was the first to raise its parking fee for violations of disabled parking to $500 for each ticket. And so there was a considerable revenue made from that, particularly because aggressive parking for publicly metered spaces. And I do believe we were doing that, when, at least when it first started. And so,
It's a great
so,
question.
so, I mean, I think how to fit that into any new system, wherever it's put in place here or something else.
Yep, no, it's a great question, and I'm happy to look into it, just to see where that stands, because it's not a piece that I'm particularly familiar with, but our police partners, I'm sure, have more background on that.
I have a question about the technology. How will it handle bikes and mopeds?
It should not notice them. We are not placing the sensors in the corrals, in the spaces where those
Oh,
are supposed to be.
Should have rephrased that.
Sorry.
Motorcycles. That's what I meant, motorcycles.
Good question.
Yeah.
I'll have to ask, but I would presume if a motorcycle like intentionally parked itself to be over the sensor would treat it as a parked space.
Yeah.
But it could easily park in a full-size parking space without covering the sensor.
Yeah.
So my guess at this point, which is just an educated guess, is that our data will undercount motorcycles parking in spaces. However, we do have areas where motorcycles have designated space. We have areas where parking adjacent to full metered spaces is kind of extra, and they're encouraged to park there, and they don't have to pay for it because it's just sort of extra space. It's not big enough for other vehicles. But that's a good question. And I don't know to what extent that will be. There's some stretches on Crystal Drive that have a lot of motorcycles on it sometimes. So
yeah.
This may sound like I'm against this, which I'm not. I think it sounds great. But when they put the sensors in, will they have to block off traffic for a while?
that's a great question. So the installation of sensors will not block travel lanes. It will block off parking lanes. But we have, and as you can imagine, to cover the 4,500 spaces that we're installing in, it's gonna take time. The good thing is that it's a flow. Installing any single one of those sensors doesn't take very much time. We estimate we can do about 30 to 40 per team per day. So like there might be somewhere between 60 and 80 done in a neighborhood on a day with 2 teams out there working. But it won't be, they won't have them all blocked off the whole day because they'll start to open up the spaces as they flow through. So we're working on the plan, and the plan of installation is in careful coordination with the paving plan, so we don't go in and install and then have them dig it up tomorrow for a paving project.
Yeah.
And also letting all of the businesses know, we're actually going to, it's kind of covered in these slides. We obviously don't have to hit the slides in their official form. As we are approaching the installation phase, we're going to start a week by week door-to-door outreach that's going to precede every segment of road where we have installation. So we're going to do door-to-door knocking on the businesses, make sure that they know we're going to be there in a couple weeks' time. And this is how it's going to look. This is, temporary no parking signs will go up. They'll go up at least the required 3 days in advance so that the police can properly enforce them. And they will probably mark off the space for no more than 2 days, is my guess. Like say on the sign that it's good for 2 days, because if there's like a weird weather event or something, they might have to come back the next day instead of the first day. But we've also talked internally about how we can't just have a block blocked off because it's raining and now we can't do the work. But all these people who could park could still park because they can park in the rain. So we're going to have protocols for how to take the signs down if we know we can't hit a block. But if we're hitting the block, it's going to be fast, and then the signs will come down and they'll be available again. Yeah, so we're really trying to make it flow, but we know it's going to flow through the neighborhoods. We're also looking to make sure we don't block off both sides of the street at the same time, so that people who are accessing this dentist office have nowhere to park because they can't get to any side of the street. It's going to be more metered than that, so that we do one side one sequence of days, and the other side another sequence of days, and the other's freed up again. Yeah. So, yeah, and keep peppering me with questions. The other slides I have here are the sort of schedule, the project launch schedule, talking basically about this year, and I've been over this in detail. This is the installation year and the setup year. We do have a demonstration site set up or almost completed in the Courthouse Plaza parking lot. And so that means we've been out there on a couple weekends and they've been putting the sensors in because it's one of the only off-street areas that we have metered and that we figure the public can start to experience. So you can see the little sensors in the ground if you go out and visit in real life. And we are shortly going to be making available to the public what a view might look like at the pricing and occupancy available, just so people can start to get a feel for what it's going to be like.
So that entire lot's going to be part of this program?
Yes, I say entire, but there are portions of that lot that are like just for police use.
Yeah.
It's not those things, but all of the publicly metered spaces that you and I could use, including the ADA ones, and I think upcoming they're installing some EV into some spaces in there. Those will all be, we will have the sensors in those spaces, so we'll be able to start showing occupancy in.
Okay.
Surprise, surprise, that lot's full all the time. It's a very busy lot. So that's this summer, and I'm out here with groups like yours, with the business community. I'm doing, for instance, a presentation tomorrow morning for the Ballston bid, and I'm sure they're going to have some of those same questions that you have. So we're trying to get out in front of everybody at this stage. We have our, getting our permits lined up and our rollout schedule lined up for the installation. And then April-ish, late spring to summer, early fall will be the completion of all that installation. And then into the winter, we'll do that initial data collection, calibration of our software, understanding those existing conditions, and the preparation of that board report. And so I did take to heart your request to be looped in on the preparation of that ordinance ask, because we'll talk a bit about what are the parameters around which we'd be asking the board to give us flexibility. Because it is important for purposes of the project to have enough flexibility to change things, but without, within the board's comfort zone, right? And within our community's comfort zone.
Oh, one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Food trucks.
Food trucks.
So, they park in, some metered areas because Arlington, it's not like other cities that specifically designate food truck zones.
Right.
So I'm assuming they're going to be, that's another, I mean, we can go all hours on this, but.
Well, to the extent that we know, because we designated something, we do have a couple places, I know in Roslyn, there are a couple spaces that are signed for food truck use, and it overlaps with meter parking use. Those will be places where we'll have we'll have sensors in the ground, so we will be capturing occupancy, and it would be influenced by food trucks that park and sit for 4 hours straight. But we'll also know it because the data will say this was a 3-hour stay or a 4-hour stay or whatever the duration is. And we'll also know that that's a food truck place that's signed for that purpose. If there are other parts of town where it's happening informally and they're just paying the meter, on the one hand, the meter time limit should be applying to them. And so they can't stay for longer than what that metered time limit is supposed to be allowing them to stay. And we'll see if there's occupancy happening for even longer periods of time. So we would learn something about that. And we can do some sort of generation of ideas based on what we know about anecdotally what's happening in the spaces versus what the occupancy data is saying.
Well, thank you.
And this you sort of talked about how you're going to advertise it, but since a lot of Ballston or corridor people might not be paying attention, when they go to park and they see that it's $3 or $5 or whatever, will there be a sign saying you may find lower price parking elsewhere, or check this app for lower price parking? I mean, because otherwise it defeats the whole purpose. Somebody will just be angry.
Right.
I'm sure they had that issue in San Francisco, because if people don't know that it's lower elsewhere,
Right.
then
They
it
think
defeats
it's
the whole
like,
purpose.
they could think it's everywhere at the same price.
Yeah.
No, that's a great question and idea, and I'm writing it down because we don't know, we haven't made a decision yet on how we message it as those things are happening. But we are hoping that there's at least a lot of awareness, and there will be messaging on the meters, for instance, that there is a thing happening. It's not going to say this is the price, because we have to be able to change it, and that'll be digitally conveyed to the meters. But it will say there is a management pilot that we're doing, and it could be affecting your prices. And so there might be some things that we could do, like exactly what you said, check this, check here for lower price parking or for parking availability info with a QR code. As it is, we're getting people with a QR code on these decals to just get them into our program, like to let them know we have a project website. This is where they can go for more information on outreach and engagement on the project. But I think you're right, there's going to be a need, as yet to be sort of defined how we handle it, to continue to communicate those quarterly changes. And yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, even just a sticker that says prices changed by meter, you know, by location, by meter. Because I don't think it does these days, does it? I don't know.
Only for instance, tour bus parking, they have a different rate, but yeah.
You know, and so San Francisco piloted this, and they're the home of Google, right? I believe they're in that area.
Yeah.
So
Silicon Valley.
But did San Francisco work with companies like Google Maps and Waze to ensure that API data, because when you if I drive to DC, for example, and it has that it's a dot that has P in a circle, and it's either blue or red to indicate difficulty of parking. Did San Francisco partner with Google?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
But it is knowable because their pilot is older, and so we could figure that out.
Okay.
But the idea is that this pilot also has as an intentional audience our app development community, because we do want them to take up our feed of data that we're going to be producing and to use it to benefit their customers. And so it's that same way, if Waze can use the data, that's great, because then we don't have to figure out how to communicate it out. People are already using Waze or Google Maps.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't know. It's surprisingly hard to get to Google when you want them to carry your data. So if you want Google to show your data, it's a big hurdle. But if they're interested in your data, it's not a big hurdle. So it kind of all depends. So, I mean, I know we've been talking for a long time, and I love it, but I want to be respectful of your evening. And the rest of my slides here are just about this engagement stages that mostly I think I've covered. I did want to hit on the fact that this Thursday, you guys have heard all the ins and outs, but this Thursday night is our first virtual public meeting. Online, links on our website, and anyone in the community or beyond can attend that meeting. I'll be giving a presentation, much like tonight, probably more formal, but going through these slides and sharing the project with the community and getting their feedback at that. And then on Friday, the online feedback form, the first stage of people writing in what we need to know at this point in time, that opens up. And it'll be open for a little while, because this isn't, as I mentioned, it's a long project. There isn't a quick deadline turnaround thing going on here. We want to make sure people become aware and have an opportunity to provide input at this stage. Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming. This
You're
was a great
welcome.
discussion.
We usually don't have exciting discussions like this with our visitors, so you are pride.
Well, I loved it, and you've given me a lot of great food for thought. So I really appreciate it. At this stage, this is exactly what we need.
All right. We look forward to seeing you in a year.
Yeah,
Sooner.
sooner.
Yeah,
A little
sooner.
sooner than that, but
Yeah.
yes. And I'll be sure to reach out to Courtney, and we'll talk about the best timing to get you guys, especially back. I mean, you can engage at any point on the project in the ways that you're comfortable, but I did hear loud and clear that making sure you aren't left out of that ordinance conversation is important. So we'll make sure to be back before then.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, so we can go to, does anyone want to motion about the minutes? How do I say that again?
So, we may, so, I think we need to go to public comment
Oh, yes.
The time is 8:45. What I've learned in my past experience, the system may shut down at 9. So just kind of a warning.
Okay, so we have to start with public comment.
Yeah.
So is there any?
Is there any public comment?
I don't
In
think she's
terms
on.
of the commission?
Hearing none,
Oh,
Okay, next is the minutes.
hearing none, could I have a motion to accept the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes as presented. There, a second? Yeah.
I'm sorry, who's second?
Nicolette.
And do I say motion approved?
And so moved. Any?
So moved. Oh, any amendments to the minutes? Okay, then do we go to committee reports?
Yes. 6, so we have, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
EHO missing middle.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know what that was.
Yeah.
Commissioner Bryant wanted to add this to.
Oh, great.
It's a missing middle housing vote and VHRC, VHC behavioral health.
Okay, great. I know what missing middle is, I just didn't know what EO.
EHO, yeah, that's like the technical language. So like the ordinance itself will be called extended house option. Yeah, so that vote will be happening on March 18th. So I wanted to, like, since this is our last meeting before that, I wanted to ensure that us as a commission had the opportunity, if we wanted to write a letter on some of the RTA options. In particular, what I identified as a concern to this commission is the options concerning the amount of units. So like they have duplexes, triplexes, all the way up to sixplexes. There is concern that the board is around sixplexes on whether they would allow us to have those. And if we have them, will they just be restricted to half mile outside, the metro corridors? Now, I believe it's in the best interest of the commission to push for the maximalist view, because of course, the more they reduce the amount of housing units, the greater, the more scarcity there is for first level. So, if the commission wants to move forward with that, I did have a letter prepared that I can email to Courtney that, well, we can't, we would have to vote now on that, right, Courtney? If we wanted to write a letter.
It's up to the.
So, as I understand you, right now, they are only allowing six ones a half a mile outside of
Well,
Boston?
so the way they formulated the RTA is that each section has a series of options. Like option 2C would be the one that determines whether we have sixplexes, but there's like 2E, 2H, like there's a series of choices for each section.
Right.
So for us, we would say we want the county to, select 2C,
Right.
which would be the maximum view.
Maximum.
Yeah.
And
Wait,
we also get
what is this about? I'm sorry.
Missing middle.
missing middle.
Yeah, and I was gonna report on that.
Oh,
Because,
okay.
because the housing commission dedicated an extra meeting.
Oh, great.
Last Thursday night, they had the regular meeting, so you can consider this also.
Okay, so just so you know, Doris,
Yes,
what
Whenever
Brian
you
was,
want
re-
that.
what Brian was,
but it's all rather complex. And
What
there are
Brian
different
was-
views.
what Brian was talking about was that he wanted to know if we wanted to write a letter on our issues around missing middle. So that's what he was proposing. So, I mean, we would love to hear what you heard as well, but it was an action item because Brian wants to see if we want to write a letter from the commission.
Well, if the commission wants to write a letter based on very skimpy information, that's fine,
Mhm.
but we do have time. It's gonna be the March meeting where the,
Yeah, so it'd be their March 18th meeting, and our March meeting, is that before or after
March is 21st.
21st? So, I mean, we could either have the vote now, or we could amend our March meeting date.
Well, key to my being able to vote is,
Mhm.
are you willing to write the letter?
Yeah.
Because I don't think, I mean, if we don't have a volunteer.
No, I've studied this issue in my personal capacity, so I am comfortable with writing the letter.
Are they willing to look at other factors such as, and I don't, if you can just say no and I'll drop it, but higher density near the metro?
Yeah, so one of the options would be that they would allow sixplexes, but it would only be a half mile from metro lines, whereas the maximalist would be sixplexes anywhere they can fit.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, I would be glad to write that letter on behalf of the commission. The question is, do y'all just want to vote today? I send the letter out. We wouldn't be able to do comments though. That's the thing. If like someone wanted to amend the letter, we wouldn't be able to do that via email, correct?
As long as the person is responding directly to the person and not replying all.
So if they replied all
Yeah,
to
so they
me
said-
and you, okay.
Yeah.
So if we wanted to do that method instead of amending our March meeting.
I guess the first question is,
let me
do we all agree?
ask this. The housing commission, because it didn't want to rush its discussion of this,
Mhm.
did not
Mhm.
take any vote at its original meeting, which was
Mhm.
the 9th of February.
Mhm.
It took its vote after a special meeting, which was held
Mhm.
this past Thursday, the
Mhm.
16th. And they went over the various options.
Mhm.
And consequently, I'm wondering, they had that meeting fully virtually.
Mhm.
So is it my understanding we can hold a meeting fully virtually if we wanted an extra meeting? And we would not be harmed at all by the FOIA?
Yeah, I believe we can do 25%.
Before we get to that,
Mhm.
which would be an extra load,
Mhm.
maybe we are all in agreement
Mhm.
that we want the same thing. If we
Yeah.
are all in agreement,
Yeah.
there is no need to put off the vote.
What would your letter be proposed?
So it'd be, yeah, so that's why I was thinking it might be beneficial for us to have.
There are 13 issues, I was just thinking about.
Yes.
Okay, there are 13 issues and
Mhm.
then multiple subparts of that people have chosen. And like I said, so it was, we had a 4-hour meeting
Yeah.
But
at
we
the
don't
Housing
have to.
Commission, but this is what I want to say about this is that the issue of building multiplexes and duplexes and multiplexes is the crux of the thing. A lot of the rest of it has to do with various zoning policies and
Mhm.
how the thing is how the buildings are sited on the property and all of that. And it has to be within the confines
Mhm.
of a single family plot.
Mhm.
Okay, so you might have 8 plexes in one single family lot.
Well,
Okay, so, well, but thing that I want to bring to this commission's attention is that on your behalf, I have brought up the fact that none of these options take into account that there is any accessible unit that's going to be able to be built. And we have the staff, bless their heart, after this was brought out, said, we're going to look at whether there are some ways, for example, with the duplex, to assign the bottom of the duplex as as an accessible unit and the top is not. And we're going to just get piecemeal nothing again, once again. And one of the things that I've tried to get them to establish is some policy on this. And they, the staff, have said last Thursday night, and they said it before, but they said it very affirmatively last Thursday night, we realized that all of the units that would be built when a property owner or a developer is developing these properties, if it's 4 or more units, it's supposed to be Fair Housing Act accessible. But there's no guarantees here. And so my biggest concern with any stand on this zoning, because it's a zoning, ordinance, is that that there are no guarantees inherent, no wording, no guarantee inherent in the written policies, zoning policies, that there will be accessibility.
That is excellent. I'm so glad that you brought that up. So I think there's 2 issues, 3 issues maybe here. One is, Bryant, you only said that you were going to write a letter on that one issue of how many units.
Yes.
So we can vote on whether you write and only mention that, or whether you write and mention that, and the fact that if it's more than 4 units, we want them to require accessibility of at least, XYZ. And then the other issue is, do we want to have you write a letter at all?
Yeah, and to Doris's point, from what I understand, from what I've heard in staff reports and through outside conversations, is that the issue comes to state code.
Issue comes to what?
The Code of Virginia restricts what the county can do in terms of requirements. Yeah.
The Code of Virginia doesn't restrict the Fair Housing Act.
Yeah, the Fair
Well-
Housing Act is federal. That federal law always
And there's
precedes
a
state
Virginia
law.
Fair Housing Act that also mirrors Fair Housing Act.
So
Requirements of
I make a motion, and this is just a motion, that you do write a letter, that you write a letter about the number of units and the accessibility that we request. And does anybody, and you had suggested 6 units?
Yes, so that would be, and I actually just pulled up my notes on that. That would be for option 2C. That would be provide the max amount of units of 6 plexes.
That is the option. That means that's as far as it can go, because previously it was 6. But one of the things that the commission should also be aware of is it's become clear over the last 2 years that this is not an ordinance that is promoting affordability of units.
Yeah.
That's what I meant to say.
It will not promote affordability of units, and so now I do know that the NAACP and other groups are in support of the missing middle, even acknowledging that that will not be more affordable for the end purchaser or the end renter.
So
And it's very likely to be more expensive,
got,
depending on where the housing is located.
so I actually got my issues confused. You're correct on fair housing. The affordability that requires change for
But
Richmond.
for about a year, they were saying
Right.
there's going to be a.
Which-
So with
There's
that in
the-
mind,
yeah.
do people feel comfortable
Mhm.
voting on it? The two things that I said, that you
Mm-hmm.
could write a letter suggesting 6 units,
Mhm.
and that we recommend
Mhm.
that if it's more than 4 units, consistent with the Fair Housing Act, that
Mhm.
there be an accessible unit.
Mhm.
No, I want language in there that specifically says this development that would allow for 4 and more units shall comply
Shall comply. Okay.
with the Fair Housing Act amendments of 1988 and the Virginia Fair Housing Act.
Okay.
And that is a minimum, an affirmative statement in the adopted policy.
Mhm.
Anything else beyond that,
Mhm.
since it's not necessarily solid in
Right.
law.
Okay, so
It's
does anyone,
like type A units and things.
So,
does anyone
Oh,
want
where
to
the other thing,
second that motion?
the other thing that I said in the meeting last Thursday night was that this commission, and I think this commission would like to see that similar to the form-based code adopted for Columbia Pike, that all of the units constructed under this policy must be visitable, meaning first floor,
Wow.
Mhm. Yeah.
and that the resident is the Columbia Pike form-based code.
So
That's what.
Well, I guess we can ask for anything we want.
to that, we won't be able to ask them to include it in the ordinance because the RTA, the options presented in the RTA, is the only options we get.
Okay,
They only ask what?
So for the fair housing, we can certainly say, we ask the county board to add it as a.
No, it's in the 13 points is the usage of and the usage of the property and the built environment on the property and things like coverage and space and on one of those points, I'd have to go look back that I recommended to the Housing Commission, which actually that's the Housing Commission meeting on Middle is on the Housing Commission's website. So the points that I made, and this was the point that I made, that all walkways must be accessible to parking and to street, and that if they use the example of the form-based code, which would mandate visitability, so no threshold, main entrances, accessibility on the first floor, etc.
okay, I have a comment. The reason that I wanted to keep this to 2 simple points
Yeah.
was because it was almost 9 o'clock, and I'm not sure that we could get consensus on all 36 points.
Yeah,
So,
agreed.
so there's 2 motions, I make 2 motions. One, that we just have, you write a letter, and it talks about 6 or more units is good, and that we want them to follow fair housing about accessibility over 4 units. That was one proposal. Another motion is that you include 3 points, that there's accessible units up to 6, and that we have some.
Not up to 6, but starting at 4. Anything over 4 and over.
4 and over would be visible.
Mhm.
Well, no. Would be fully accessible in accordance with the Fair Housing Act.
Fully accessible in accordance, so that's
Okay.
2
And that,
motions.
and then
on the
all
table.
units,
Mhm.
all units, like the Columbia Pike form-based code, which the rest of the units would be considered single family. So that all units covered under the missing middle, meaning duplexes, triplexes, and as well as the bigger ones, would be visitable
Okay,
to ground floor
So,
portions.
so do we have a second on the first motion?
Well, here, I'll make, motion, I motion to authorize myself to write a letter, focusing on maximum units allowed and FHA enforcement for 4 or more units.
Okay, and
Mhm.
do we have any changes or amendments? Was I supposed to add the amendments to that motion?
I did not understand.
Alexa, you're also able to vote since we have quorum?
Oh, I am able to vote. I thought I was not even able to comment, so I've been
Okay.
quietly listening. I think that is a good idea, now that I know that I'm allowed to say so.
Okay. Brian, could you repeat the motion? I don't think Doris heard. So
So-
Brian's going to say the motion, Doris.
The commission, with this motion, the commission will authorize me to write a letter addressing max units and then addressing fair housing for, ensuring that 4 or more units are fully accessible under the fair housing.
Okay, I would amend it. That the,
You have to be quick though, because it's
and
already
this
9
is a
o'clock.
friendly amendment,
Mhm.
that the Disability Commission the Disability Commission supports the proponents of the missing middle proposal
Mhm.
to allow property owners to build more than one unit on a single family parcel up to 6 units in an effort to address community equity and but we have reservations and concerns that, for the most part, the proposal does not address the needs of the disability community for affordable and accessible housing, will not increase stock of accessible housing.
So the motion,
Wait, okay, so, but because this is recorded, right?
yes,
So
How does that work? How do
however,
we take
so
a vote
we
on
would
a friendly
like,
amendment?
we would like the county board to add language to the proposal
they
that would
cannot do that.
ensure
Okay,
that all applicable units would comply with fair housing
don't worry, Brian,
accessibility
we could always
standards.
not accept it.
Yeah.
So what is the rule about a friendly amendment?
Well, that's not a friendly amendment. She's getting into, what Doris is getting into is the details of the letter, which will be reviewed before the commission. But, I will accept it in brevity.
All right, I like the first one without the friendly amendment.
My
Am I allowed to vote on it?
concern with this proposal is that is completely ignored the issue of accessible housing.
It's
And
in
if
there.
the
I
letter doesn't
mentioned
say
4
that
more
right up
units.
front, I don't care how many damn units they build on them, they're not gonna be available to the disability community.
Doris, as I said before, the letter will be emailed to members of the commission before we send it to the county board. This motion simply authorizes me to write said letter. Everyone will be able to get a comment in to me to finalize it. It will not move forward if I do not have the full vote of the commission.
But what do we do now? I don't know the process. Can we vote on the First Amendment without the friendly amendment or not?
Let me restart this. I will write the letter. It's motion to write me a letter, for me to write a letter to include the
To write a
units,
draft.
to write a draft letter addressing number of housing units up to 6 plexes and addressing the enforcement of the Fair Housing Act for 4 or more units.
No, and if you want to put it most simply, what I'm proposing is that we will express our support for allowing property owners to subdivide their property into 6 units, as many as 6 units.
If I may.
And let me say it, so I'll finish it in one sentence. However, disability commission, and that would express the disabilities disappointment and concern that in developing this proposal over the past 2 years, it has not addressed the need for increasing the stock of accessible housing. That's it.
That sounds fine to me.
Yep, I will take that.
If it has that consensus.
Okay.
So there's a motion, is
Accept
there a
that?
second?
You seconded it? Okay. Now what? Can we vote?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, motion passes.
All right.
All right. I'm going to
Okay, well-
get ready for Ash Wednesday.
Well, I have one more thing. I will make this brief. We can discuss it next meeting since we have time. Actually, given the timeline of it, I'm okay with pushing the VHC SPRC to our March meeting.
Okay, gotcha, I'll put it first thing on the.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right.
Can we look at adding an adult changing station to the roster to look at implementing that to new building codes?
Mhm.
Cool. All right. Can I just say meeting adjourned? Meeting adjourned. Thanks, Alexa. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for your
Now,
comments.
happy Mardi Gras.
And Doris, thank you for your comments because I would not have known about a lot of those issues had you not bring them up.
About what?
Thank you for your comments about the missing middle because I would not have known all of those issues.
You know what?
Oh, thank you so much. Good memory. I'm listening, Doris.
Yeah, I want to let you know 2 things. One is that coming in here
I will
tonight,
see y'all next time. And Bryant, you know if you need anything.
which is really the second time I've been no, it's the third time.
Have a good one.
I've been
Have a good
here
evening.
Since the new lighting was put in, the first time was when we had our meeting downstairs.
Right?
In the construction. The second was when I came over to some other meeting, I think it was a housing meeting,
Have a good evening.
and couldn't get through the lobby, so, but it wasn't so much the construction as the lighting.
Okay.
But when I came in tonight with all the construction